My name is Mabel Fortin. I am 66 years old and I live in Orillia, Ontario, on the second floor of a building I own, on a street where my name appears in the public record in two separate places. Neither of those things was true 18 months ago. For 5 years, my husband said the same thing to me each time he caught me near his side of the bed. "Don't open the gray box, Mabel. Not while I'm here." He was not a dramatic man. He said it the way he said most things, quietly, without looking up from whatever he was doing. Once over supper, once the autumn my sister-in-law broke her hip, once the January he was diagnosed, and again 6 weeks before the end, with a hospital blanket over his knees and the afternoon light going flat over Lake Couchiching. That last time he added something new. "And when you do open it, don't call Darren first." I told him he was being morbid. He said it wasn't morbid, it was housekeeping. Then he looked out the window and didn't say anything else. Howard died on a Thursday in January. We had been married 43 years. He was 71, and the lung cancer came late and moved fast, and by December, he had stopped making plans past the week in front of him. Darren came to the hospital every Sunday. Our daughter Annette drove up from Toronto the last 2 weekends and sat beside me in the hall while the nurses did what they needed to do. Howard died quietly, which was the only way he ever did anything. The funeral was the following Wednesday at the church hall on Coldwater Road. It was -20, and the roads were glazed, and 83 people came anyway, which tells you something about how long we had lived here. Darren stood at the door and shook hands for an hour. He wore his father's gray tie. I was proud of him for about 90 minutes. Welcome back to Bold Mom Stories. This is where mothers and grandmothers share what their families would. Rather, they kept quiet. Leave a comment and subscribe if you want to hear how this one ends. Let me tell you what I did for a living, because it matters later. I was a school librarian for 32 years at Patrick Fogarty Secondary in Orillia. I started in 1988 when the catalog was still on index cards in wooden drawers, and I retired in 2020 when it was all database and the kids could search from their phones. The job looks quiet from the outside. Inside, it is one thing repeated forever. Knowing where to look. If something exists, a book, a record, a government document, it has an address somewhere in a system. My whole career was learning how those systems worked and teaching other people to use them. I was good at it. In my own house, I never used any of those skills. The deed to 22 Bayfield Street says Howard R. Fortin. We bought it in September of 1986, the month after Darren was born. Howard's father helped with the down payment. The lawyer at the time put it in Howard's name. I never asked why. The hardware account, Fortin Building Supply on Mississauga Street since 1991, was his. The vehicles were his. The savings account had my name as secondary, but they always mailed the statements to Howard. That was not something we argued about. It was something we never got to. People will tell you that a woman like me had things taken from her. It was not like that. I handed them over. I had a job and 2 children, and I was grateful not to have one more thing on a Wednesday. I don't speak up much. That has never been the same as having nothing to say. On February 10th, 12 of us sat in the boardroom of a law office on Coldwater Road for the reading of the will. There was coffee from a machine and a plate of digestive biscuits that nobody touched. Howard had made the will in 2016 with a lawyer named Thiessen, who read it the same way he probably read everything. Flatly and in order, without pausing for questions. Article 2 gave me Howard's personal effects and the household contents. Article 3. Thiessen read this without stopping, gave me all promissory notes and obligations owing to Howard at the time of his death, together with any security attached to them. Article 4 gave the property at 147 Mississauga Street, the commercial building Howard had operated since 1991, to Darren. Article 5 split the residue of the estate 60% to Darren and 40% to Annette. Darren laughed before Thiessen got to the next paragraph. Not a polite laugh. The real one, from the chest, the kind he uses when something at a hockey game goes exactly the way he expected. "So Mom inherits the filing cabinet," he said. "Nothing but paperwork and IOUs." His wife Krista looked at her phone. Howard's brother Edmund, 70, said Darren, in the voice you use on a dog. And here is the thing I noticed and stored away and did not understand for another 7 days. Thiessen stopped. Half a breath, maybe less. He looked at me over his glasses. Then he went back to the page. He was the only person in that room who read documents for a living. He had hesitated. Nobody else caught it. I only caught it because 32 years of tracking down things in catalogs had trained me to watch for the half second when something doesn't fit. I drove home. I sat at the kitchen table with my coat still on. I did arithmetic I had never done in 43 years of marriage. The house was in Howard's name. Town assessment put it at $485,000. Darren's wife had already sent me, at 3:15 that afternoon, a text message with a link to a retirement residence on Coldwater Road. Nice patio. She put a little sun emoji at the end. Nobody said, "Get out." Nobody has ever said, "Get out" to me directly. What they do is start discussing where you're going while you're still in the room, with the same warmth they'd use planning a birthday dinner. You add it up and you come out to, she'll agree. I went and made tea. I stood in the kitchen while the kettle boiled and I thought about a promise. He said 5 years ago, "Don't open it while I'm here." He was gone. So at what point exactly does a promise like that expire? I poured the tea, I let it go cold. Then I went upstairs and pulled the gray steel lockbox out from under his side of the bed. He had bought it at Canadian Tire 3 or 4 years ago, the kind rated for minor fire protection. Combination lock, 4 digits, our anniversary, 0912. September 12, 1981. The lid stuck for a moment and then gave, and the smell of old paper came up, the way the back stacks at the school library used to smell in July before the HVAC was upgraded. I put the box on the bed and looked at what was inside without touching anything first, the way you do when a patron donates a box of old books and you need to understand what you have before you start moving things around. There were 6 items. I took them out one at a time and laid them on the quilt. The first was a document clipped into a red duotang folder, promissory note across the top in capitals, dated March 15, 2015. $480,000 and no cents. 5% annual interest, 180 monthly payments of $2,832. First payment due April 1, 2015. I read those numbers 3 times. Then I let myself go down to the signature line. Darren K. Fortin. I have known that signature since he was 11 years old. He worked out the flourish on the tail of the F in 6th grade at the kitchen table, on the back of a spelling test, over and over, until it looked like something a man would write on a legal form. Stapled to the back was a smaller sheet, barely half a page, 4 lines of typed text, pay to the order of Mabel R. Fortin, signed Howard R. Fortin, dated October 12, 2018. My name, in the middle of the line, first name, middle initial, last name, not as a secondary contact, not in smaller print, the way you'd write it on a form that actually matters. My hand started shaking so badly, I had to set the paper down on the quilt to keep reading it. Then I sat down on the floor and I stayed there for 35 minutes. When I got up, I did the only thing I know how to do with a collection of documents I don't understand. I cataloged them. Same as any library donation. You don't guess. You lay things out, you count them, you write down what you have. Legal pad from Howard's nightstand, 6 items. 1. The promissory note with the smaller sheet attached. 2. A charge on the property at 147 Mississauga Street. The commercial building, 16 pages with a red stamp in the upper right corner, Ontario Land Titles Office. Instrument number CT281954. Registered March 15, 2015. Howard's name is Chargy. Darren's name is Charger. 3. An assignment of charge, 2 pages. Howard R. Fortin transferring to Mabel R. Fortin. Red stamp. Ontario Land Titles Office. Instrument number CT304872. Registered October 12, 2018 at 10:23 a.m. 4. A small red spiral notebook, the kind that used to cost $1.50 at the Staples on Atherley Road. Inside, a payment ledger in Howard's handwriting, 3 columns: date, amount, balance. Starting April 1, 2015, every first of the month, $2,832, checked off. Regular as breathing, for years. Then July 2023. The amount column was blank. In the margin, Howard had written 2 words: no payment. Then August, no payment. September, October, November, December, January of 2024, the whole year blank, all the way through to January 2025. 18 lines, he numbered them. The last one said NP 18, January 3, 2025, 2 weeks before he died. The handwriting on that last entry is not his normal handwriting. It lists to one side. The pen barely stays on the line. He got up in the morning. He came to that desk. He wrote down that his son had skipped him again. Then he went downstairs and asked me how I'd slept. I sat with that for a long time. 5. A receipt from the land titles office, the small kind on thin paper. $35, dated October 12, 2018. 6. An envelope sealed, on the front in Howard's block printing. Mabel. I opened the notebook first. I wasn't ready for the envelope. It was past midnight when I finally picked it up. 1 sheet of lined paper, both sides, dated October 12, 2018. He wrote, Mabel, if I hand this to you now, you will forgive him before the kettle boils. You forgave Edmund twice, and the second time's cost us the back deck money. You are not weak. You are just fast, and you are fast in one direction only. I'm not asking you to be hard. I'm asking you to be late. I got to that line and I stopped. I put the paper on the nightstand. I lay on top of the quilt in my clothes and looked at the ceiling. I didn't read the second page until much later. On February 22nd, Darren came for the snowblower. He backed his truck up to the garage and left it running. While he worked the machine loose from the back wall, he talked about the spring. No rush, he said, but we should probably get an agent through before the market softens. I asked him one question. When was your last payment, Darren? He stopped. He had a bungee cord in his hand and he set it on the tailgate and turned around. What payment? I didn't answer. A trick I learned from 32 years of students who hadn't done the assigned reading. If you wait, they keep talking. He laughed, smaller than the laugh in the boardroom. Mom, come on, you can't collect from yourself. Dad understood that. I told him to take the snowblower. He asked if he should take the winter tires in the garage as well. I said yes. Then I went inside and stood at the kitchen window and watched him back out of the driveway. That evening, I called Annette. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for about 5 seconds. Then she said, read me the top line on each document, just the title. I read them: promissory note, charge, assignment of charge. When I got to number 3, assignment of charge, Howard R. Fortin to Mabel R. Fortin, she said, Mom, Dad signed the mortgage over to you. I said I didn't know what that meant. It means the person Darren owes money to is not the estate. It's you. It has been you since 2018. I sat down on the arm of the couch. Then she said the thing that actually mattered, and she said it twice. You need certified copies, not the papers in the box. I said I was holding the originals. Why weren't those enough? Because what's in your box proves you have a piece of paper. What's in the land titles registry proves it happened and was recorded. Anyone can type up a document. The public record is what no one can argue with. I wrote that down on the back of a hydro bill. Then she said, do you want me to come up? I said, not yet. I said it in the voice I used when second-year students wanted to skip the reference databases and go straight to a Google search. I had a thing to go do and I wanted to do it myself. The land titles office for Simcoe County is in Barrie on Dunlop Street. I drove down the 400 on a Tuesday morning in February, 40 minutes south through county that was flat and white and enormous in the winter light. I had driven past that building 100 times in 40 years and never once gone in. Inside, there is a counter. Behind the counter, computer terminals and shelving. 2 public workstations along the left wall. One of the chairs was broken, listing forward at the seat. I found that out. The clerk that morning was a woman named Suzanne. She wore her reading glasses on a beaded cord and had a cardigan folded over the back of her chair because the room ran cold. I told her I'd never done this before. She said most people hadn't. "What's the property address?" 147 Mississauga Street, Orillia. She pulled up the parcel register and turned the screen slightly so I could see it. Walked me through the instruments, top to bottom. CT 281954. Charge in favor of Howard R. Fortin, March 2015. CT 304872. Assignment of charge to Mabel R. Fortin, October 2018. There I was, in a public record since 2018. Sitting on a shelf on Dunlop Street in Barrie for 6 years and 3 months. Anyone in my family could have walked into that building on any weekday between 8 and 4 and found this for the cost of a parking meter. No one ever did. Suzanne printed the parcel register. I set the printout beside the originals from the lockbox and went through them line by line with my finger, the way I'd verify a new catalog entry against the physical item in hand. Every instrument number matched, every date matched, every registered address matched, even the red stamp matched. She made me certified copies of the 2 that mattered, 32 pages at $1.50 each, 2 certifications at $6 each, $60 cash. She gave me a receipt. I want to be clear about something, because it is the whole point of this story. Nothing in that gray box was a secret. The most important parts of it had been sitting in an open government database for 6 years. My son's own name was in that record. Anyone in my family could have walked into that building and found this for the cost of an afternoon. Not one of them ever did. On the way home, I stopped and bought a butter tart at Tim Hortons, which I haven't done since the year Howard's mother died. I sat in the parking lot with the engine off and called a lawyer. Her name is Rosemary Addo. Office above a dry cleaner on Coldwater Road. 29 years doing estates and property law in Simcoe County. She tells you her rate before you sit down. $2,200 retainer, $325 an hour. I put the lockbox on her desk and didn't say anything else. She read for 20 minutes. She made no sound, except once, at the red notebook, when she pushed her glasses up onto her forehead and went still for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Fortin, do you understand what your son's position requires?" I said, I didn't. "It requires this charge to have been in your husband's estate on the day he died. If Darren inherits both the debt and the asset, they merge. He effectively owes the money to himself, and the obligation disappears. Lawyers call it merger. It's a real doctrine. It's how he's been living." She tapped the assignment. But this charge left the estate on October 12, 2018. It wasn't there when Howard died. There is nothing to merge. Your son doesn't owe the estate. He owes you. Then she asked a question nobody had asked yet. Did he ever tell you why he made you wait? I said there was a letter, and I hadn't finished it. She looked at me for a moment across the desk and let it go. Then she gave me the timeline, flat, like reading a set of instructions. Notice of default by registered mail, 30-day cure period. If nothing arrives, we file. The earliest anything happens in a courtroom is sometime in March. Anyone who promises faster is selling something. At the door, she asked one more thing. Do you want your son to lose that building? I stood in the stairwell with my hand on the railing. I said I didn't know yet. She wrote the plan on a yellow legal pad and turned it around so I could read both columns. The left side was about the charge on 147 Mississauga, outside the estate entirely. That was mine. Default notice, cure period, then notify the tenants under the assignment clause if nothing came in. The right side covered my protections inside the estate. The matrimonial home designation under the Family Law Act, which meant Darren could not sell or transfer 22 Bayfield Street without my consent regardless of what the will said. The funeral expenses I had paid from my own visa. $11,400, 8 days after Howard died because the invoice had gone to Darren and come back declined. Priority claim. And the equalization claim under the Family Law Act if it came to that. She also told me something a lesser lawyer might have skipped. Your own charge works against you in some of the calculations. The equalization may yield very little once your assets are factored in. But filing it freezes him. He cannot deal with the estate property while your claims are pending, and I would rather hold a right and not need it. I asked how long it all takes. She said 11 weeks. I said I had already waited 43 years. On March 3rd, I drove to the post office on Peter Street and bought a registered mail envelope. Canada Post, signature required. The notice of default went out that afternoon. 2 pages. I read it 4 times before I let Rosemary send it. 18 missed payments. July 1, 2023 through January 1, 2025. Principal arrears, $50,976. Late interest, $2,106. Outstanding principal balance, $391,288. Cure deadline, April 2nd. The delivery card came back signed 4 days later. Krista's signature. Then 6 days of nothing. On the 7th night, my phone buzzed at 11:30 and went to voicemail. I played it with my morning coffee. Darren, you have no idea what you're doing to this family. Dad forgave all of it. Everybody knows that. Krista texted 40 minutes later. Calmer, which was worse. We have retained legal counsel. Please be aware that pursuing this against a family member at your age constitutes financial elder abuse, and we will not hesitate to treat it that way. I read that twice, 66 years old, and I had become the predator in my own kitchen. Here is what neither of them did in the next 30 days, with a lawyer on retainer and everything at stake. Neither one asked me the one question that could have saved them. Neither one said, "When was that instrument registered?" Bernadette Chu is 53, and she has run a physiotherapy clinic on the 2nd floor of 147 Mississauga since 2019. She pays $1,400 a month. She came to my door one Tuesday in March with a letter she had already opened. It was on letterhead I had never seen. Effective April 1st, all rental payments for 147 Mississauga Street are to be remitted to Fortin Properties Inc. An account number, a routing number, signed by Krista Fortin. Bernadette said, "I've paid Howard and then Darren for years. Nobody's ever handed me a new bank account in a letter." That afternoon, I drove to the Orillia Public Library and used one of the public terminals. Ontario Business Registry, 3 minutes. Fortin Properties Inc. Incorporated, January 29, 2025. Howard died January 16th, 13 days later, 11 days before any of us heard a single word of that will. I learned one more thing from Rosemary later. July of 2023, the same month Darren missed his first payment. Krista had moved the store's accounts to a Scotiabank branch in Barrie. The automatic transfer to Howard that had run without interruption for 8 years was never set up at the new bank. It wasn't missed, it was left out. I understand some things about her. She is 41 years old, and she builds fences around money, the way some people board up windows before a storm. Because she watched her own family lose everything when she was in her 20s. And she has not trusted a dollar since that she couldn't see in an account with her own name attached. I understand where that comes from. I have never once mistaken it for an excuse. They organized that company 11 days before anyone in my family knew what Howard's will said. Bernadette asked me who she should be paying. I said, "Give me 6 more days." April 2nd came and went. No payment, no call, no partial offer, no conversation. I did not feel vindicated. I made soup and fell asleep in the chair at 8 o'clock. On April 8th, Rosemary filed 6 documents at the Barrie Courthouse, Ontario Superior Court of Justice, Estates Division. Default proceedings on the charge. Notice of matrimonial home designation. Priority claim for funeral expenses paid January 24th. 3 further claims inside the estate. The clerk stamped every one of them and handed me the copies. Then she turned the calendar around on the counter and told me the next available date on the estates list. Tuesday, May 13th, Courtroom 3, 9 a.m. 35 days. I did ordinary things during those 35 days. I had the car in for its spring service. I walked the waterfront most mornings. I washed my green wool coat twice, which was once more than it needed. Every time I hung it back in the closet, I decided I'd rather it be clean. I already knew what I was going to wear. I'd known since the day I sat in the parking lot on Dunlop Street. The 2 weeks before the hearing were noisy in the way that things get noisy inside families. Edmund worked the phone. I know he called at least 9 relatives because 4 of them called me afterward to say they were staying out of it. Krista posted a photograph on Facebook of Howard in the backyard 2 summers ago, laughing at something just out of frame. The caption said, "Some people can't let a good man be remembered in peace." 41 likes. I counted once and then stopped looking. The night before, Annette drove up from Toronto and slept in her old room. We ate scrambled eggs at 9:30 like she was 17. She asked if I was ready. I told her the thing I had been sitting with since February. Darren said I'd inherit nothing but the filing cabinet. I said. He was right. There is nothing in that gray box but debt and obligation. He just had the direction wrong. The next morning, I walked into courtroom 3 with the gray lockbox under my arm. The Barrie courthouse is on Mulcaster Street. Stone facade, steps that ice in April. Courtroom 3 has high ceilings and 2 tall windows that look out at the parking structure. There were 5 other matters on the docket that morning. A guardianship. 2 estate accountings. 2 brothers from Innisfil who would not sit within 6 feet of each other. I counted the room while we waited. 24 people, most of them strangers, folders on their laps. Darren sat at the counsel table in his navy blazer next to his lawyer. A man named Prendergast, who was polite and thorough. The politeness was the part I wasn't ready for. Krista sat in the row behind Darren with her phone face down on her lap. Edmund sat directly behind his nephew and put his hand on Darren's shoulder twice. Annette sat beside me. I wore the green wool coat over my good blouse and my mother's watch. On the table in front of Rosemary was the gray lockbox with a numbered exhibit sticker pressed onto the lid, slightly crooked, half over the combination dial. I kept looking at that sticker. Someone in an office had put a number over Howard's handwriting. The registrar called Fortin. The judge asked if the parties were ready. Prendergast went first. He was measured and courteous the whole way through. He said the deceased had verbally forgiven the obligation on multiple occasions over many years. He said, "I had never been involved in the business, never held signing authority on any of the business accounts, never attended a single closing or renewal." He said, "My claims had the character of a family disagreement brought into the wrong room." And then, the part I had not been prepared for, he said I was being advised, that phrase. The implication being that a woman of 66 could not have arrived at these decisions by herself. I had heard that exact suggestion, in that exact tone, in school board meetings for 30 years. I did not expect it in a courtroom. The judge let him finish. Then he asked one question: was the forgiveness in writing anywhere? Prendergast said it was verbal, Your Honor, but consistent and repeated. The judge looked past him and asked Darren directly whether he had made payments on the charge in the last 18 months. Darren stood up. He had the same smile he wore in the boardroom in February, same room in his face. "Your Honor," he said, "my mother inherited nothing but the filing cabinet. That's all that was ever in that gray box. A bunch of IOUs. Dad knew what they were worth. Everybody knew." He half turned when he said it, the way you do when you want the room behind you to nod along. Somebody in the 3rd row shifted in their seat. One of the brothers from Innisfil. Annette put her hand flat on my knee. Rosemary stood up. She had 4 pages of paper in her hand and nothing else. She spoke more slowly than Prendergast, flat, like someone reading instrument numbers off a shelf label. Exhibit 1. Promissory note dated March 15, 2015. Principal $480,000. Signed by Darren K. Fortin. Attached. Allonge endorsed pay to the order of Mabel R. Fortin. Signed by the deceased. Dated October 12, 2018. Exhibit 2. Charge on 147 Mississauga Street securing that note. Registered at the Ontario Land Titles Office. Instrument CT 2E81954, March 15, 2015. Exhibit 3. Assignment of charge from Howard R. Fortin to Mabel R. Fortin. Registered October 12, 2018. Instrument CT304872. She set the gray lockbox on the edge of the table when she said the last one, sticker facing out. Then she put it back down and said the sentence I have thought about every week since. This charge left the deceased's estate 6 years and 3 months before he died. There was nothing for anyone to inherit. There is no merger. My client's son does not owe money to himself. He owes it to his mother. The judge looked at Prendergast over the bench. Counsel, did anyone search the parcel register before today? Prendergast looked at his table for 2 seconds. We proceeded on information from our client, Your Honor. The judge said nothing to that. He let it sit in the room. Rosemary was not finished. Exhibit 4. Certificate of Incorporation, Fortin Properties Inc., organized January 29, 2025. Howard Fortin died January 16, 13 days after his death, 11 days before the will was read to the family. Signed by Krista Fortin. She let that date sit for a moment. Exhibit 5. The Red Spiral Notebook, 18 entries, July 2023 through January 2025. She read the last 3 lines out loud in that same flat voice. NP16, NP18, NP18, January 3, 2025. Then she held the notebook up so the page was visible from the bench. Darren came out of his chair. That's a sick man's notepad. That's not evidence. That's my father lying in bed with a pencil. His lawyer's hand was on his forearm immediately. The judge said, Mr. Fortin, in one note, and that was enough. Darren sat down. I did not turn around. I want to be truthful about why. It wasn't strength. I was afraid that if I looked at his face, I would get up and go to him, because he is my son, and he was 20 feet away being told to sit down by a stranger, and that is not something a mother ever gets used to, so I kept my eyes on the gray lockbox instead. Exhibit 6 was the visa statement, $11,400. Macintosh Funeral Services, Orillia. Date, January 24, 2025. 8 days after Howard died. My name on the card. Then the judge asked whether I wished to be heard. I stood up. Rosemary told me I could speak from where I was. I said 5 things. I have counted them since. Your Honor, I am not asking this court to take my son's building. I am asking that he pay what he signed his name to in March of 2015 in a lawyer's office. I paid for my husband's funeral on my own credit card on January 24th, $11,400, and I would like that paid back. I told the court I was withdrawing my equalization claim because Rosemary had explained that with the charge already in my name, the calculation would likely yield nothing and would reduce Annette's share in the process. I did not want more than what I was owed. I wanted exactly what I was owed. And then the last thing. I am keeping the matrimonial home designation because I am still sleeping in that house. The judge granted the protection on the home. He allowed the funeral claim as a priority debt in the estate. He accepted the default proceedings on the charge. He removed Darren as estate trustee and appointed a neutral administrator from Barrie. A woman Rosemary described as thorough, unhurried, and very good at returning calls. He ordered a full estate count within 30 days, including all accounts touched since the date of death. The charge and the promissory note he did not touch. Probate court doesn't. That was between me and my son. We came out into the hallway at 11:20, stone floor. Every set of shoes in that building is loud. Krista went first, ahead of her husband, and the glass door hit the frame hard enough that the court officer looked up from his desk. Edmund stopped in front of me. He opened his coat and then closed it again. He said, very quietly, he never told me either. For about 3 seconds, he looked exactly his age. Then he straightened and said, but you didn't have to do this in public, Mabel. And he walked down the steps. Darren came last. He was not loud anymore. He looked the way he looked at 9 years old outside the principal's office, not defiant, just smaller. He said, why didn't you tell me? 5 years, Mom. Why didn't you say something? So I told him. Because your father knew that if I'd said something, you'd have sent one payment that week to keep me quiet, and one payment accepted restarts the whole clock. 30 days, all over again, every single time. He didn't hide this from me, Darren. He protected me from what I would have done to it. He stood there. Then he asked me the question I've thought about more than anything else that happened in that building. Did he not trust me? Is that what this was? I said, go home and read the second page. Then I walked out to the car. I sat in it for 25 minutes before I started it. Here is what happened after, in order, because dates matter more than feelings. By the end of May, the neutral trustee had filed a complete accounting. On June 14th, Darren wired the arrears, $50,976, plus late interest and legal costs to Rosemary's trust account. The funeral money came back on May 28th, 4 months and 4 days after I put it on my visa. I did not foreclose. I had thought about it for the full 25 minutes in the parking lot. Then I called Rosemary and told her I wanted to reinstate the note with new terms. Automatic bank transfer on the first of every month, no exceptions. One payment more than 15 days late, and the full balance accelerates with no opportunity to cure, and no conversation about it. He signed the amended terms in Rosemary's office on a Wednesday afternoon. He asked if he could have a copy for his file. I said, of course, that's how this works. The tenants at 147 Mississauga went back to paying Darren in August, once the charge was current. Bernadette sent me a card. Krista dissolved Fortin Properties Inc. in August. No announcement. 22 Bayfield Street sold in October for $491,000. After the estate claims and the costs of administration, the residue split was considerably less than what Darren had been telling people to expect. He does not bring that up. I bought a 2-bedroom condominium on West Street in Orillia. Low ceilings. The kitchen window looks at Lake Couchiching if you stand at the counter and tilt your head. The deed says Mabel R. Fortin. Just that. No secondary name, no smaller print. Just mine. The night I moved in, boxes still in the front hall, I finally read the second page of Howard's letter. He wrote 3 reasons. I had worked out the first 2 on my own, which I think he counted on. The first, you would forgive him before the kettle boils. I've told you that one. The second he wrote this way, I couldn't be the man who tested his own son while I was still in the room. I've watched him at that counter for 30 years, and I know what he'd do the minute I was gone, and I could not stand to be alive and to be right about it. So I built the test and I left the room. The third was 4 lines down, underlined twice. And Mabel, one payment restarts everything. Don't call him. Let it get quiet. And then, at the very bottom of the page, the last thing he wrote. You have never had your name on a single document in 43 years. Now you do. I'm sorry it took me this long. I sat with that for a while, a long while. Then I found a pen, and on the white label stuck to the lid of the gray lockbox. Under the combination numbers Howard had written there in marker, I wrote 2 words in my own handwriting. Find it. The box sits on the bookshelf in the front room of the condo now, where you can see it from the door. The red notebook is still inside. I haven't moved it, and I'm not going to. Darren calls on Howard's birthday. We are, in the most literal sense, still in business together. Annette came up last month, and I took her to the land titles office on Dunlop Street in Barrie. I showed her the public terminal, the parcel register, how to type in a name, and pull up 40 years of transactions in under 10 minutes. It took us 9 minutes to find her father. 6 years and 3 months of him sitting in a database in a room with a broken chair and a clerk who told us most people never bother to look. She cried a little. I let her. And then I told her the only useful thing I know how to say, which is the same thing I said to students for 32 years when they couldn't find what they were looking for. The information was never hidden. It was in the catalog the whole time. You just have to be willing to go look. The record sat on Dunlop Street for 6 years and 3 months, $60 in one afternoon. Not one person in my family ever went. If this made you think of a piece of paper somewhere in your house that you've never actually read, go read it this week. Then come tell me in the comments what you found. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.